Welcome everyone. I hope the audio's okay where you're sitting. Can everyone hear well enough? I don't want to overwhelm you with too much volume. But my name is Daniel Simon. I'm the editor-in-chief at World Literature Today. Of course, welcome back to day 3 of the 2023 Neustadt Lit Fest, sponsored by WLT and the Neustadt family and the College of International Studies here at OU. It's really wonderful to have so many students with us, as well as faculty and friends and other colleagues. I just wanted to say quickly before we jump into the panel and talk about Chinese American popular culture, which is our subject this afternoon, as well as the work of Jean Yang in particular, that if you're not really familiar with the Neustadt tradition, we have this great connection to the teaching mission of OU. And so there's always a student element built in with the class that's taught by an OU professor typically. Dr. Zeigler is teaching the seminar this semester devoted to Jean Yang's work. We have many of his students here who have taken advantage of this opportunity. Colorado Academy, Norman Public Schools are also, they've been involved for the last 20 years, especially with the NSK Children's Prize. And CA does a curriculum packet that's connected to the work of the winning writer, and so students anywhere in the world can go online and access that packet and engage with the work of our laureates. So I think it's really important to think about that connection here at a great teaching school like OU. And especially over the years, we've had colleagues in modern languages, literatures, and linguistics take part, faculty colleagues in particular who are often contributing editors to World Literature Today. They also take part in the symposia and the festivals that we sponsor, Department of English, International and Area Studies, Fine Arts. Many of the works over the years, in recent years, have been adapted into dance and musical and theater adaptations. We've had dance films the last couple of years as well. So Film and Media Studies now, again, this year is a partner, and so many others on campus. It's really a great way to connect to such a rich tradition of faculty at OU who help make the Neustadt tradition and WLT such a great ongoing venture. So one quick program note, Green Feather Books is still outside. This is your last chance to buy a book before the end of the Lit Fest. Hopefully get it signed by Mr. Yang or Trung Li Nguyen, who are here with us this afternoon, very generously agreed to sit in. And you'll want to check out all the other books that are available there as well before we wrap up this afternoon. And for those of you who are on Zoom, welcome to our listeners out there, and we hope you enjoy this afternoon's panel. If you're not already coming to the formal awards ceremony this evening, you can log in at newstadtprize.org and register for the Zoom live stream. Around 8 p.m. this evening, we'll have the ceremony broadcast on our Zoom channel as well. So for those of you who are coming in person, bring an umbrella. It will probably be raining after too long. So, okay, I think we'll go ahead and start with introductions, and then what I'll do is introduce all 3 of our panelists. They'll each come up and speak for about 5 to 7 to 10 minutes individually about their engagement with the work of Jean Yang in Chinese American popular culture and Chinese popular culture more broadly, and then come up for Q&A afterwards. So we'll have a mic out in the audience. You can ask lots of good questions for our panelists. And we were debating who should go first, and we're actually kind of doing it in reverse alphabetical order. We have Ping Zhu, James Zeigler, and Man-Fung Yip, our 3 panelists, and I'll introduce them one by one. Ping Zhu is professor of Chinese literature and culture at the University of Oklahoma and serves as the acting editor-in-chief of Chinese Literature and Thought Today and on the editorial board of World Literature Today. She is the author of Gender and Subjectivities in Early 20th Century Chinese Literature and Culture and the co-editor of 2 scholarly volumes, Maoist Laughter and Feminisms with Chinese Characteristics. James Zeigler is Associate Professor of English at the University of Oklahoma. Dr. Zeigler is the author of the book Red Scare Racism and Cold War Black Radicalism, and a co-editor of the literary studies journal Genre. Founded in 1968, Genre is published by Duke University Press in partnership with the Department of English at OU. Professor Zeigler has been teaching a regular course on the graphic novel since 2008, and is, of course, our professor of record for the Neustadt seminar devoted to the work of Jean Yang this term. Third, we have Man-Fung Yip, who is chair and associate professor in the Department of Film and Media Studies at OU. Dr. Yip is the author of Martial Arts Cinema in Hong Kong Modernity, Aesthetics, Representation, Circulation, and co-editor of American and Chinese language cinemas, examining cultural flows, as well as the Cold War and Asian cinemas. His current research is focused on the cultural Cold War in Asian cinema. And what we'll do is show a clip first, a trailer actually, from the Disney Plus adaptation of American-Born Chinese, if you haven't seen it yet. Here's a quick preview, and then we'll invite Dr. Zhu to come up to give her presentation.
You know, people love this. It's good for you.
Right, but this one looks like it's giving me the thumbs up.
So, do you have a lab partner yet?
Is there a Jim Wang here?
Wang.
This is Wayne Chung.
Wei Chen.
He's a new student and he's Chinese, like you. He's gonna tag along to all of your classes.
I found seats for us. Come on.
Except in math. He's way ahead of you in math.
I just want to be a regular guy who does regular stuff.
You made a new friend.
Just thought this year was gonna be different.
I may be able to help.
What's going on?
I'm not from this world. I need your help with my quest to stop the uprising.
The gate between Earth and heaven is opening. Okay.
You must stop it, or everyone will perish. The fate of your world hangs in the balance.
I don't really see how I fit into this whole thing.
You're my guide.
Can we come up with something a little bit cooler than guide?
Servant?
Yeah, no, you're right. Guide's better.
It will be difficult and dangerous.
Be the hero.
What if I'm not, though?
Fate is not decided up there, but down here.
So freaking unbelievable.
Everything is more connected than you think.
Huh.
Yay.
Have a lot of you seen the adaptation? Hopefully you'll have questions about this idea of translation and adaptation from image to book to text to screen and beyond as we get into our panelist presentations today. So I will invite Dr. Zhu to come forward to talk a little bit about American-Born Chinese and her work with the novel. Oh, sorry.
Hello, everyone. First of all, I want to thank Daniel and RC for including me on this very prestigious Neustadt panel. And it is really my honor to present a work that is so inspiring, empowering, and enlightening, American-Born Chinese. So you can see the book cover on the screen. So this was a graphic novel by Jean Yang, who is in the audience, in 2006. And the novel, the graphic novel, actually weaves three stories. The first story is a story about Wang Jing on the left, Jing Wang on the left side, and he is a high school student of American Chinese descent who grapples with his racial identity and is fascinated with the idea of transformation. He loves Transformer. citing David L. Eng, whose classes I took at Rutgers University more than a decade ago, and Xin Qi's phrase in their co-authored book, Racial Melancholia, Racial Dissociation, Jing Wang actually is immersed a kind of racial melancholia. What racial melancholia means is the internalized feeling of loss, grief, and ambivalence experienced by individuals when their racial identity is subjected to racist ideologies and stereotypes. Jing has a crush for one of the white girls in his class, but he's not confident enough to pursue her, and he's at the same time also prohibited from pursuing her by one of the white boys in his class. And again, we have another term for this kind of racial experience, which is called racial castration. And this is, again, a term proposed by David L. Eng in his 2001 book. So the racial castration refers to the racist perception of Asian American men as emasculated, homosexualized, and queer. We can say that what Jing experiences is a form of racial castration, precisely as we read in the graphic novel, because his articulation of his racial identity intersected and intertwined with, of his sexual identity intersected and intertwined with his racial identity. So as a result, the construction of the Chinese American masculinity is always already a problematic. Hence, Jing Wang's failed romantic endeavor. So the second story, which is the figure on the right side, is a story about a white boy, Danny. And he's also pursuing a girl, and he likes in the same high school. However, Danny's problem is that he's haunted by the periodic visit of his cousin, whose name is Qi. It's a Chinese cousin. So here is an image of Qi. And as you can see from the screen, Qi is reminiscent of the popular racist cartoons that you can read or you can find from American magazines and newspapers in the late 19th century. So he embodies the polarized and distorting racial stereotypes of Chinese men in America. On the one hand, he has a long queue, he has prominent buck teeth, he talks stupid talks, he eats exotic food. On the other hand, he's hypersexual and he excels all classes at school. So he's super intelligent. Danny and King Qi, actually, they are the one person. They just symbolize the split of identities between what Jing Wang wants to include and what or become, and what Jing Wang wants to exclude from his own identity. So the story of Jing Wang and Danny are actually one story of transformation viewed in this sense. Jing wishes to rid of his American-born Chinese identity and be fully integrated into the mainstream American culture. However, his transformation is merely a symptom of double consciousness. So what is double consciousness? It was the idea proposed by the foremost black intellectual of his era, W.E.B. Du Bois, in his 1903 book, The Soul of Black Folks. So let me quote his definition about double consciousness. As I quote, it is a peculiar sensation. This double consciousness, this sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt or pity. One ever feels his two-ness, an American, a Negro, two souls, two thoughts, two unreconciled strivings, two warring ideals in one dark body, whose dogged strength alone keeps it from being torn asunder, end of quote. So this double consciousness is represented in Jing's story and Danny's story, and it's dramatized even in Danny's story. And Jing's two stories of transformation, actually they are mirrored and interlaced with a third story in the graphic novel, American-Born Chinese. And this third story is revised from the famous Chinese legend of the Monkey King. And the original novel was produced in the 16th century in the novel Journey to the West, or 西游记 in China. So in this revamped Chinese legend, the Monkey King first also obtained the double consciousness when he was rejected from the dinner party in heaven. He became embarrassed of his own monkey fur smell when he returned and his bare feet. And he trained hard in order to transform himself into a giant form wearing shoes, regarding himself as the great sage. So after being rejected, his conscience started to split. And the Monkey King succeeded in transforming himself. However, he is not recognized still not recognized by the other gods and deities. So one of the gods, Zeigler, who is the creator of the whole world, and he is a Christian style of single god, calls the Monkey King Little Monkey, and he buries him on a mountain, as you can see on the right side, for 500 years. On the mountain of rocks, we can see this Chinese seal. It reads as 自由者 in Chinese, and it can be translated as I am that I am. And this is the expression used by God when speaking to Moses at the burning bush in the book of Exodus in the Old Testament. So this is a revamped Chinese myth. So 500 years later, Wang Laosao, the loyal disciple of Zeigler, the creator, teaches the monkey how to break the seal. He said, returning to your true form is not an exercise of kung fu, but a release of it. So returning to your true form and you can come out. So here we can see that the Monkey King actually shrinks back to his true form, which is much smaller, and he came out from the mountain. That's a magical release for himself, right? So the seal is both external and internal. You have to return to your true form. Wang Laosao also asked the Monkey King to remove his shoes, another reference to the story of the burning bush in the Bible. So the Monkey King story of transformation and the reversion actually sheds light on the story of the Asian American problematic. The Monkey King's story of failed assimilation, despite achieving the great skills and the giant form, speaks to another Asian American predicament. Asian Americans have been portrayed as the most successful racial group in the United States. However, being the high-achieving minority does not warrant their assimilation. In fact, as May now from Columbia University says, in 2021, Asian Americans are still barely 6% of the US population, yet too many Americans still believe that there are too many Asians in the US and that we do not belong here. So in Jin Yang's revamped Chinese legend, it is not the god's power, but precisely the giant form that imprisons the Monkey King. This enables us to understand that in Jin Wang's story, it is his wish to be different from what he is that executes the racial castration. This establishment of a healthy Asian American masculinity, therefore, hinges on one's ability to, as I quote from Du Bois again, to attain self-conscious manhood, to merge his double self into a better and truer self, end of quote. And there's one more thing I find it's very empowering, which is in the original Monkey King story in China, the Monkey King acts like an emasculated, asexual man who shows no interest in women. Actually, in the postmodern adaptations of the Monkey King story since 1990s, people have started to question if the Monkey King is truly happy, whether his assimilation into the world of gods means a form of self-castration. Thanks to Jin Yang, I believe that we finally have a happy Monkey King in American-born Chinese who is a husband and a father, who liberated himself from both external and internal seal, and who has attained a self-conscious manhood by merging his double self and by returning to his true form. We can say that whoever can attain this state is equal to I am that I am. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Zhu. I feel like we're sitting in on a masterclass of scholarship and interpretation and intellectual vigor and heft this afternoon. So we'll queue up the next show.
Shall I hear him just raise the bar? Put it down.
There we go. So, cheers.
Hi, hear me okay? My remarks are informed by my experience teaching the course that was organized in connection with this year's Neustadt Festival in honor of Jean Yang's work. For the past 9 weeks, our small seminar of advanced undergraduate and graduate students has been reading, discussing, and writing about Yang's graphic novels and comics, reviews and scholarship about his work, as well as secondary sources on the history of comics and the technical features of the medium. Earlier today, our class met with Jean. That seemed great. Will the members of the class just raise your hands? You're a lot of the audience. I promise not to call on you. I just want to acknowledge you. Thank you for your work in the seminar. Also wanted to sort of out you so that other students here who haven't yet had a chance to take the Neustadt class can ask you about it. I was invited to oversee this year's Neustadt class because I routinely teach our English department's course on the graphic novel. As Daniel mentioned, my first class was in 2008. And by that time, let me say, graphic novels and comic books had already achieved sufficient literary esteem to be a topic for study at serious universities and colleges. On day one of the course, I always assure students that every English department worth its salt offers a course in graphic narratives. OU English, I'm pleased to report, was a prescient early adopter. Back in 1999, well before my time here, our course on the graphic novel was added to the university's official course catalog. That's a significant bureaucratic hurdle for those who know. So, I've also long been a reader of Jean Yang's work. His American-Born Chinese, as you know, is one of the most acclaimed and influential graphic novels published during the 3+ decades since Art Spiegelman was awarded a Pulitzer Prize for Mouse. In the United States, at least, that award for Mouse in 1992 is an important part of how we mark the start of comics studies as a field within the discipline of literary and cultural studies. Published in 2006, American-Born Chinese, I'm going to call it ABC, is also a tent-post work, giving shape and cover to the proliferation of comic book novels. My guess is that the book's success provided the publisher Macmillan with proof of concept for its then very new graphic narrative imprint, First Second. Still, despite all this advance notice, designing a course focused on Yang's work was a new challenge. It was my summer project. I read or read again many of his works. The titles on screen are the limited selection for the syllabus, with apologies to Avatar and a few others. I also investigated academic scholarship that engages with Yang's work. This sampling of books and journal articles is just a suggestion of how his work is quite popular among academic professionals who research and teach graphic narratives and Asian American cultural history. One prominent interest across much of the professional academic writing about Yang's work is how his comic book stories represent and engage with popular culture. Take ABC. As Min Song, Stella Oh, and other scholars have observed, the cousin character, who embodies a mix of stereotypes about Asians, is portrayed to recall old Hollywood renderings of shuffling, obsequious, yellow-faced figures, such as Mickey Rooney's notorious turn as the neighbor in Breakfast at Tiffany's. In ABC's scenes in which the cousin's conduct attracts ridicule, laugh tracks scripted across the edges of the panel signal that the racist caricature is intertextual. You just saw an image in that in the last talk. The cousin is a citation of a recurring mass media spectacle in American radio, film, and television. ABC and many of Yang's other sole and co-authored works confront the extent to which the most prominent and prosperous institutions of American popular culture have disseminated Orientalist tropes and narratives. At the same time that his narratives document and critique examples of mass media normalizing anti-Asian attitudes, Yang's work, according to the scholarship, expresses impressive optimism about the capacity of the most widely circulated forms of popular culture to enable progressive social change. Considering the volume of Orientalist bad examples, optimism is unexpected. It's a hard sell. But threading through his graphic novels is an implicit argument about popular culture's resourcefulness for transforming social norms. With the very few examples, I'll point to two kinds of evidence that encourage this optimism. First, his work identifies popular culture as a scene of struggle that is subject to revision and in which inventiveness can contend against dominance. Second, his graphic novels include well-researched, compelling precedents, real-life historical episodes of pop culture expression that successfully rerouted mainstream preconceptions about Asian Americans. His most familiar research derives from his lived experience, as he explains in his foreword to this new edition of Journey to the West, the 17th century classic of Chinese literature. Dr. Zhu made a lot of this easy, so you're familiar with everything I'm going to refer to. He learned of the legendary trickster Monkey King from his mother's stories. In ABC, he retells the Monkey King's origin story and transports the character into the narrative of interpersonal turmoil that stems from the Chinese-American protagonist Jin's aggressively white school. In this sequence, the Monkey King has revealed his true identity and is speaking as a concerned parent. That's the healthy masculinity that she was talking about. He explains that Jin's estranged friend, Wei Chen, is really Monkey King's son. And here in the top right corner, in a nod to the capacity of pop culture merchandise to validate cultural identity, Monkey King presents a transformer doll for Wei Chen to take on his quest among the mere mortals. At the end of the novel, Jin and Wei Chen begin to repair their relationship. Jin appears the same, but Wei Chen has given up his bookish looks and first-gen immigrant awkwardness. I'm going to go back so you can see that. You can see him growing into his glasses in the bottom left. He's abandoned that look for a hip-hop aesthetic. His masculine swagger and tricked-out car with booming subwoofers allude to a pop cultural phenomenon. The Japanese import car scene in California, initially dominated in the 1990s by young Asian American men. We owe this insight to scholar Man-Fung. He explains that Japanese import cars, turbocharged to excel in illegal street racing against Detroit muscle, were also, quote, a way of forcibly asserting value to what was widely seen as valueless, namely Asian American masculinity, end quote. The cultural politics of this example are complicated. Young Asian American men like Wei Chen, who participated in this car culture, refused and rebuked the stereotype of Asian men's effeminacy. They were defiantly fast and furious. But they were also immersed in practices of ostentatious consumerism that extended to the objectification of women as more adornment for the cars. Even with this gender trouble, the allusion in ABC refers to pop culture resourcefulness. Superman Smashes the Klan provides a much less ambivalent example of a popular culture reinvention. Yang's graphic novel from 2020 is an adaptation of a Superman radio series that was broadcast in 16 episodes during the summer of 1946. As Yang documents in a personal and historical essay, and let me say that the comic book author is an awfully good essayist, that's included at the end of the volume. The radio program was developed in indignant response to a public relations campaign launched by the Ku Klux Klan earlier that year. A new enterprising Grand Dragon, medical Dr. Samuel Green, endeavored to make the Klan respectable while holding on to its doctrines of hate and violence. Green managed to lure Life magazine to publish one of its famous photo essays about a Klan initiation ceremony at Stone Mountain, Georgia. That's a major site for the Confederacy. Although the Life photo spread was accompanied by a critical description of the events, the piece was still prominent mainstream publicity of membership rights that were treated separately from the Klan's acts of terrorism. It was effectively good press. The Adventures of Superman radio series, in contrast, sets Superman directly against the, quote, Klan of the Fiery Cross as it begins a terror campaign in reaction against a Chinese-American family, the Lees, who have moved into a metropolis neighborhood. The family's oldest child, Tommy, had quickly become the star pitcher for a youth baseball team, relegating Charlie Riggs to second in the rotation. Charlie is, of course, the son of the local Klan leader. The feud between the ball players gives way in the story to an intricate murder plot intended to protect and advance the Klan's cause. Superman, per usual, saves the day, this time by intercepting bullets fired at a game. And it's really easy to actually find this whole audio recording on the internet. Yang's graphic novel is a faithful retelling of the story from 1946 with a couple choice modifications. At the start of his story, Superman hasn't yet realized he can fly. He's just a leaper. And Tommy Lee has a younger sister, shown here in the background, who is so discerning about Superman's abilities that she helps him realize he has been restraining himself. Flying for the first time enables him to overpower the Klan before it can use a kryptonite weapon against him. But in the baseball park, this feat reveals to the crowd that he's other than human. Like the Lees, he's an immigrant, deserving of full admission, but denied unanimous acceptance. For no good reason, some in the crowd favor the Klan. The graphic novel's recuperation of the radio program recollects a democratic potential that must have been vivid for its audience in 1946. Broadcast to 4 million listeners, the radio series included Asian Americans in the Americana pop culture of baseball and Superman. That opening in popular representation would mostly close again in 1949, when the Communist Revolution in China stoked Cold War Red Scare alarmists in the U.S. to reanimate yellow peril hysteria. Yang's novel and companion essay document and affirm a pop culture happening that in fact damaged the Klan, it hurt its recruiting numbers, and showed the promise of a more progressive future. Communicated over the radio to millions of people, this historical possibility remains a reason for optimism about the capacity of popular culture. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Zeigler. The master class continues. I hope you're taking notes for the final, which starts at 3.
So I don't think I can raise the bar anymore. For one thing, I don't have those beautiful, well-prepared PowerPoint slides, right? But in any case, let me start with a caveat, which is that I am no expert on comic books or graphic novels. My training was in film and media studies, and that is the area I'm going to focus my remarks today. Specifically, I would like to share some thoughts about the Disney Plus streaming series, American Born Chinese, which, of course, as you know, is loosely based on Jin Yang's groundbreaking graphic novel of the same name, and of which Yang is one of the executive producers. The original graphic novel came out in 2006. It was very popular, it was very influential, but it is only until this year that it was adapted into a TV series. I'm sure that Yang could tell us more about the adaptation process, but as far as I know, he was approached by different studios about bringing the graphic novel to screen over the years. But he was reported to have said that, and I quote, "The world needed to change in order for there to be an appetite for a story about an Asian American protagonist." It seems to me that this change, talked about by Yang, has been happening in recent years, as witnessed by what I would call a growing mainstreaming of Chinese American and more broadly Asian American film and media. As a category, Chinese and Asian American cinema first emerged in the 1980s with people like Wing Wang and Peter Wong, and later Justin Lin and Alice Wu making independent films that circulated in the film festival circuit and art house theaters. But those films existed by and large at the margins of the commercial mainstream and were not very visible to the average viewers. But things started to change in the past 5-6 years or so. What we have been witnessing is a growing number of Chinese American and more broadly Asian American film and shows that are able to break into the mainstream commercial market and also the mainstream consciousness. So for example, Crazy Rich Asians was a huge box office hit in 2018. And The Farewell from 2019, directed by Lulu Wang, while it was not as commercially successful, it was still a major critical success, with Awkwafina winning for Best Actress at the Golden Globe Awards for her performance in the films. And with Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, which came out in 2021, we had the first Chinese-American Marvel hero to enter the cinematic universe. And of course, there is Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. Everybody knows about that film. And in fact, it is interesting to note the many parallels and interconnections between the film and the show American Born Chinese. For one thing, the series also features Michelle Yeoh and Ki Hun Kwan, even though they only appear in key supporting roles in the series. But still, as you can imagine, right, this was a shrewd commercial move, considering all the attention given to Yeoh and Kwan after their Oscar-winning performances in the film. But more significant is, I think, right, the shared idea of the multiverse or multiple worlds. So in Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, the Michelle Yeoh character, as you know, right, she's a middle-aged Chinese-American immigrant who runs a lingerie shop with her husband. And she discovers the existence of the multiverse and must connect with parallel versions of herself in parallel universes. And that includes her being a kung fu master and a film star, among other things, in order to prevent the multiple worlds from being destroyed. Similarly, Jin Huang, the protagonist in American Born Chinese, he also finds himself moving and negotiating between different worlds. At the most basic level, he needs and tries to balance between his life at a mainly white high school and his life at home with his immigrant parents. But that's not all, right? As he also discovers an alternate universe and becomes entangled in a battle of mythological Chinese gods, right? That includes the Monkey King, but also Guan Yin, the goddess of mercy, played by Michelle Yeoh. Of course, multiverse as a concept is by no means new and has been explored in many works of science fiction, whether they be movies, TV shows, or comics. But I do think that the idea takes on special meaning in the Chinese-American context because the trope in many ways alludes to the necessity of Chinese Americans and immigrants in general to negotiate between different worlds and by extension, different selves. Both the film and the series played a lot on self-identity, or is ambivalence, rather. And this mirrors the way in which many Chinese Americans are not settled about who they are and feel like they are outsiders to both the American and Chinese communities and cultures. Yet, it is interesting to note that in many ways it is also through the multiverse concept that some sort of healing or resolution is achieved. So again, in Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, the Michelle Yeoh character finally comes to terms with the multiple versions of herself in different parallel worlds and uses her multiverse powers to bring happiness to those around her. In doing so, she attains a new level of self-understanding and reconciles with her husband and her daughter at the end of the film. We can see something similar in American Born Chinese. At least the TV series version, where the main character getting caught up in the alternate world of mythological gods and martial arts is exposed to a much wider, deeper world than he ever imagined. And in doing so, that really kind of allows him to re-engage with his cultural heritage and to become more settled about his own identity. So for me, American Born Chinese is part of this ongoing trend of what I would call the mainstreaming of Chinese American and more broad Asian American film and media. The question still remains as to why the mainstream audiences have become more and more receptive to Chinese American and Asian American film and media and popular culture in general. Does it mean that as a response to Jian's observation I mentioned earlier, the world has indeed changed and that there's now an appetite for Asian American stories and protagonists? I don't have an answer to this, right? But hopefully we can kind of devote more attention to it in the Q&A session. So thank you.
We'll invite our panelists to come up to the stage now and answer questions from the audience. I have a handheld mic. I'll come around, so if you just raise your hand, I'd be happy to bring it to you. Maybe I could prime the pump with one question, which may be a question for Jean. In maybe 2018 or 2019, you had an essay in the Horn Book called Why Do Comics Matter? And I'm just thinking about what Dr. Yip was just saying in terms of how the world needed to change since then. And I'm thinking of COVID. I'm thinking of George Floyd. I'm thinking of January 6th. I'm thinking of anti-Asian American hate, the spike in violence in that regard. Perhaps, I don't know, in terms of what's changed since you wrote that essay, which ended on such a hopeful note, how would you write it differently today if you were rewriting it?
A question for me? So,
Could I?
Yeah, sure. First, I do want to say it is both an honor and also really surreal to hear people smarter than me talk about my stuff. Thank you so much. Thank you for your deep reading and for putting so much thought and heart and effort into reading my work and interacting with my comics. In terms of what's happened since I wrote that essay in 2018 or 19, I actually think that the world right now is experiencing like K-shaped progress. This is a phrase that President Biden used to talk about the economic recovery of the nation. You know, he says that certain parts of the nation are going to recover very quickly and other parts of the nation are going to fall behind. And I think that's happening in every single aspect of American society right now, including Asian America. I think Asian America is experiencing the kind of progress that I could only dream about when I was in college. But at the same time, we're reading about things happening to us, you know, like the kind of violence that's being perpetrated against our elders that I would not have imagined when I was in high school. That part of the news feels like I'm reading articles about the 1960s when I was a kid in the 1980s. It just feels like part of us is moving backwards in time and part of us is progressing. And I kind of, for better or worse, I think that's going to keep going, you know?
Thank you so much. How's the volume on the mic? Can everyone hear okay? Great. Questions for the panel or any perhaps discussion amongst the three of you to follow up on anything that was said in your presentations initially? Perhaps a response to each one another?
I could ask Dr. Zhu just to say a little bit more about the concept of racial melancholia that you attributed to David Eng at the beginning, and he taught you, so that was cool. And I guess I'm interested, one, I'd like to understand that better, and also I like your account of the Monkey King's like healthy masculinity. In ABC, he gets to be a dad, and in the class we talked about how ABC gives us two different versions of the Monkey King, because there's like the son who's trying to grow up and figure out what to be as an adult, and that's like the first 7 chapters of the original Monkey King story, where he's strained by fear and trying to come to maturity. And then when he comes to maturity, like he's impressive, like the dad in the book. So, but racial melancholia is like hard to get over. That's part of the quality of melancholia, is it's like a repetitive feeling. So I'm interested, I guess, to understand more about racial melancholia and how it gets worked through in this narrative, not just through the dad, but I guess overall. You can tell I'm interested in optimism. So.
Thank you for the question. So melancholia, in psychoanalysis, melancholia is a state in which the subject experiences some kind of loss, but the subject is unable to articulate what the loss is. So racial melancholia, I believe, can be explained from the lens of double consciousness. Because if you have like a warring souls, right? If you have different perspectives about who you are and what you want to be and how other people perceive you, then it is very hard for the subject to determine what is a gain and what is a loss. The subject position becomes very ambivalent. And if like you can feel like, oh, I'm proud for my, for example, American Chinese identity, but on the other hand, when you go about at school, you would think other people are laughing at your food, for example, or your look, right? So which position is a position to judge yourself? In that sense, the melancholia constitutes because you cannot articulate your loss, right? Because you do not even have a fixed subject position. So it is very important to consolidate the double consciousness, to merge the double consciousness into one in order to become I am that I am, right? That I think that's a very interesting point I wanted to make actually during my presentation. The seal says I am what that I am. It seems to be a seal that imprisons the king, Monkey King. However, it actually is the imperative. The Monkey King should follow in order to liberate himself. So that's actually, this God is not punishing God at all. It's actually a very wise helper, right? Thank you.
Question from the back. I'm coming to you.
Hello. My question has to do with Everything Everywhere All at Once. What are your thoughts about like the mother's like homophobia and how that changes throughout the movie?
Need 2 mics.
Well, I think that's precisely the process of transformation, right? That the protagonist goes through, right, during the course of the film, right? And this transformation is in many ways contingent upon the fact that she kind of comes to terms with her multiple selves, right? That happen right in the different kind of multiple roles, right? And of course at the end of the film, right? She kind of comes achieves a better understanding of herself, right? And in doing so, right, she's able to reconcile with her daughter, right? But the point I'm trying to make is that this whole idea of the multiverse also kind of takes on very special kind of meaning and significance, right? Within the Asian American context, right? Just think about the way how a lot of Asian Americans have to negotiate between different realities, right? And then do not find themselves kind of at peace, right? In any of the communities, right? So I think there's the sense that you need to kind of take in all the roles, right? And kind of coming out of them, right? In order to kind of achieve a better understanding of of yourself. So that's a kind of a common thread, right? That I see in both the film, right, as well as the TV series.
More questions for our panel? If we have, yeah.
So my question is kind of for all of you, and probably more towards Meng-Fu, but. So I took like an Asian American studies class last semester, and I thought it was interesting. My professor had noted that he was basically hired because in response to like the Atlanta shootings and because of this rise in anti-Asian hate that kind of allowed for this position in Asian American studies to like open up. And I feel like with like the rise in anti-Asian hate, there's kind of been this influx of wanting to represent Asian culture and kind of just have more representation in general, and not to be like pessimistic at all, but so we've seen this influx. I was wondering if you think there will be like a point where that drops off, just because like maybe there's just this this one like moment where it's like kind of just peaks and then it drops off, or if you think there's a way to like keep the momentum going, to keep this like representation like past like just these like spikes in a way. I don't know.
Great question. I wonder if there's a connection to the mainstreaming of Asian American culture as well.
Yeah, in a way, it is kind of, paradoxical that, you find kind of, both currents, right, existing at the same time, right? You see, the rise in anti-Asian kind of, rhetoric, right, and violence, right? But at the same time, you also see, kind of the growing mainstreaming, right, of Asian American culture. And also kind of, the increasing receptiveness, right, of the mainstream audiences, right, towards, Asian American, stories, and characters. Whether there is kind of a connection between the two, right? I don't know, right? Because I think you made a very interesting observation about the fact that your professor basically saying that the hiring, right, is contingent upon this kind of anti Asian rhetoric and violence, right? I think is kind of interesting, right? Because even though it might seem kind of paradoxical, right? In the surface, right? There might be a way in which they actually kind of go hand in hand, with one another. Obviously, I do want this kind of mainstreaming, to go on, right? Because I do think that is a step forward, right? Compared to, for example, what we see 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. But at the same time, we also know that popular culture is very kind of volatile, right? Because one thing that is popular these days, right, might not be popular, right, tomorrow. So, but I do think that what we see, right, in films like Everything Everywhere All at Once, right, and also American-Born Chinese, right, they do a very good job, right, in positioning themselves, right, trying to deal with those issues, right, pertinent, right, to the Asian American community, right, but at the same time also broad enough, right, to have this appeals, right, to the mainstream audiences. So I do feel optimistic, right, about the continuing kind of of this trend.
Grace, thank you for the question. Since it started with an anecdote from a professor, it's a big question. It's like, how do you run a university well? And crisis hiring is like not the answer to that question. And yet that kind of reactiveness happens regularly. It's part of what like wears us out. Because you want to seize the opportunity to improve your department and hire in the moment to be responsive to student needs, right? And it's so like sort of momentary and hard to sustain. So, so you're quite like, one, let's get you on track for a deanship, and two, I think we need to do more team building and like less crisis hiring. And I want to share a story that Jean told. Help me get this right if I start to get it wrong. But when Jean visited with my class or our class, we talked a little bit about the Monkey Prince. With a 15-minute invitation to talk instead of 10, I would have given 5 to the Monkey Prince, which is a new DC superhero. And if you don't know already, like go find out. And I was we were curious about like the origin of that. And Gene told the story that it wasn't his idea. Like he's the story writer, but the idea came to him from a DC editor. This is where I can't remember if it's Jessica or Jessica Chen. Right? So Jessica Chen like pitched the idea, do you want to write this? And you're like, maybe, because you had so much Monkey King going on in many places, right? And then Bernard Chang, who does the art for Monkey Prince, was also very conversant in the tradition, because all three of you come to Monkey King through the best kind of research, like at home with your family through storytelling, right? And the trio of you in that narrative are the institutionalization of an interest in Monkey Prince and Monkey King inside like the biggest comic book producer in the English language, right? Like DC, the Empire. So that's like the answer to Grace's question, I guess. Like you need numbers so you can have sustainability instead of like relying on spontaneity and moments of incredible trauma, which is part of how like your prof got hired, right? Thanks. Also budgets.
I'll just address that question very briefly. So I think the Asian-American relationship is determined materialistically and historically by large geopolitical paradigms. And I think in the future, obviously the American focus has shifted from the relationship with Europe to the Pacific, right? So because of the rise of Asia in terms of economic power, so I wouldn't not be surprised if there's more representations of American Asia in American mainstream media. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have a question. I think we have time for one, maybe two more, from Linda Stack Nelson on the Q&A or the chat in Zoom, who actually was, I think, a former WLT intern and was in the Neustadt class many years ago. So welcome, Linda. Thanks for your question about form. Wait, yeah. The panelists have all touched on the relationship between comics and film. Could any of them say more about that on a formal level, and whether that relationship is different or unique in stories based in Chinese American culture? straight to you.
I can just give a very brief answer that while I boasted that comic studies is very much institutionalized, and there are many journals and anthologies and book series at a bunch of university presses, and every good English department's got a class, it's also still a kind of new interest in scholarship and young enough that comic studies like goes poaching on other disciplines. So I often feel like I'm just teaching like really slow movies and borrowing lots of terminology from film studies. And like the class about Gene's work is kind of an auteur theory class, in that we have a central director, like who produced these works. But in order to have a vocabulary for describing comic books, there's a kind of, it's like a medley of different interpretive approaches, and film has been a big part of it. So we're often talking about the composition of shots and pretending we're a camera looking at the page. That's not true to every comic book author or artist, but some are more cinematic than others. That doesn't touch the bigger, like the social question about Asian American culture. So I'm passing the mic.
I mean, of course, even in comic books, right, you can talk about the composition, right, you can talk about, the shot scale, right, and things like that, right. But then, obviously, in films, we are dealing with, a whole lot more kind of, audiovisual techniques, right, that allow the makers, right, to visualize, right, things, that might only be alluded to, right, in the graphic novels. And just think about all those special effects, right? In this series, right? And again, those things are, I think, really what kind of differentiate the two mediums, right? In many ways, so you can have, for example, the action and martial arts, right? In graphic novels, right? But then they would kind of come across very differently, in an audiovisual medium, right? With all those special effects, right? And it's interesting that a lot of the recent Chinese American those that are really popular, right, and kind of tap into the commercial mainstream, they all in one way or another, right, involve these elements of martial arts, right, especially the fantastical kind, right, in other words, not better with special effects. So I think there's a way in which, again, that element also kind of appeals, right, to the mainstream audiences.
Okay, well, the final's about to start, so get out your blue books and your pens. No, I think we should probably wrap up for this afternoon. I know students probably have other classes. Our panelists also have other commitments. Thanks especially to the Fred Jones Jr. Museum of Art, Thomas Brent Smith, director, and everyone on the staff here for hosting us today. I really would like to direct you back to that Why Do Comics Matter essay that Gene wrote back in 2018. Ends on a note of the stories we tell about ourselves and how we listen to the stories others tell us. And I think that's such an important, enduring, kind of uplifting thing to end on in our day and age. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you all for coming. And we'll see you tonight, hopefully either in person or online. Good night.